Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Brian Briscoe has been in the executive search industry for almost 25 years, finding Australian and New Zealand employers the right executive talent. He's a doer, having founded and scaled his own recruitment firm, and is a keynote speaker on HR, personality reading, and staffing matters. You can find Brian at briscoesearch.com.au. Brian, what I see in you is someone who has a remarkable ability to read people, to pick up on hundreds of tiny communication cues that others don't, and understand what makes them tick. I'd like to call it EQ, but I feel it might be more than that. And I suspect that's why you've been so successful as an executive recruiter, because the higher the org chart one escalates, the more important personality skills are. But I also sense a competitive spirit where you love sport, and I suspect that competitive spirit translates into winning by getting the right executive into the right role. If that resonates with you, tell us, how did you come to be in this place?
Thank you. What a unique introduction, and thought-provoking, actually. And you kind of have the mirror put up against you to see what might make you a half a success in this industry. Because it is ultimately I introduce and sell people to people. So it is a highly, highly volatile and complex area to be in without putting too fine a point on it. I got to Australia when I was 23 and then got to Perth when I was 24, from Ireland obviously, hence the U2 poster in the background, the U2 signed LP in the background. And I always had a silent fascination in the art of hiring. I'd worked for one of the biggest banks in Ireland. I'd been through an interview process myself that I was probably left a little bit underwhelmed by. But I also watched people in my life, like my dad, go for jobs as he transitioned away from a teaching career and more into the finance sector himself. And I just, from a very early age, I kind of felt there needed to be a better way of doing this. And what I was seeing was that no one was really spending time to do it. And now my process, when I show it to clients, they often remark on how different it is. And I'm actually surprised by that, because most of what I do, I don't believe is rocket science. But I think maybe the thing about common sense is it isn't that common. So I just fell into it when I got to Perth, but was subconsciously seeking it out, I think, as well, when I look back in hindsight. And that was August 2000 I got into it, and now 24 years later, here I am.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Today we really want to talk about hiring tips for entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs often have to hire a CEO. Depending on your business, you might call it a general manager or something like that. But I'm talking about the top level talent. So really specifically, my first question is, what mistakes do entrepreneurs make when hiring a CEO to run their business?
Many, and varied, and repeated. There's so many mistakes that get made. I think the first point to make is it is not a perfect process, and people are not perfect. And so you can do everything right to start with, and then ultimately end up with a result that's suboptimal. I love the term that performance is equal to the person to the power of the environment that you put them into. So I worked in a fruit and veg shop when I was 17. I reckon I was the worst employee ever, but I moved straight from there into a graduate program with the bank, and I was told I was one of the best young bankers they'd seen. So that was the same human being. I didn't go and have a personality transplant in between those two jobs, but one environment really suited me, one didn't, right? So I think we do need to remember that it is a process that even the best of us get wrong at times. But there's a couple of things that come to mind for me straight away. that I think entrepreneurs fall foul of. One is entrepreneurs are very fast moving, very get stuff done kind of people. Yeah. The process of recruiting critical talent is it really is steady momentum. And the reason I use those two terms together is that you need to keep the process moving, but you've got to do it in a really steady, fastidious, sequential manner. And the minute you start skipping steps, and I guarantee you will skip steps because you start to think your problem's, the solution's sitting in front of you, therefore you want to grab it. Because entrepreneurs are big problem solvers, entrepreneurs are doers, and I know this as well because I've built my own companies over the years. So I know the sins that we can all be guilty of committing on a daily basis, right? So I describe executive search as continuous assessment. So someone can't just come in and do an interview and that's it. They score 100%, you're going to take them on.
Yeah.
The face-to-face interview can only be 15 or 20% of the total mark. And in my processes, I put candidates through, I won't say the ringer because it's overused as a term, but I put them through a very lengthy and fatigue-inducing process because I want to see what they're like over time. And I want to look at consistency and congruency and resilience and self-awareness and some of the things I really look for in leaders. I want to actually have the process test that rather than just them telling me that they're resilient and that they're tenacious. So that's one thing. I think entrepreneurs, because of our problem-solving aptitude, but also our problem-solving temptation, and also the fact that we're always moving fast, we can absolutely run the risk of having the process be truncated, abbreviated, and then halo effect kicks in. And the second is recruiting in our own likeness. We're all guilty of it as human beings, right? We, in life, with friends, with partners, in work, we tend to try to get the world to look like us rather than actually completely appreciating the polar opposite of who we are. Yeah. The best CEOs I've put in, the best GMs I've put into organizations, there's a thin layer. If you look at it as a Venn diagram, that A intersection B is skinny but important. Yeah. It's normally value driven. So they normally carry similar values, but how they deliver is so different. And the most successful ones that I can think of are ones where there's an appreciation for those differences between them because their values are aligned. And I think often what we do is we tend to recruit in our own likeness. And I use the word likeness very deliberately because we tend to recruit people we like. And we tend to focus on how much do I like this person. Yeah. It's important, but it's down the charts from how much can this person impact my business? How much can they bring to my business something different to what I bring? How will the two of us synergize? How will my staff get positively uncomfortable with the person? You know, how will they agitate? But we think of agitate as a negative connotation. It's not. So it's things like that we rarely test in the recruitment process that I do, and I think people that are self-confessed experts in what my job is should do. Rather than just giving a client someone they like, it's just like, what's the point? Just work more hours. Save yourself $250,000 to $500,000 a year, right? So they're probably the two things that come to mind for me. So A, truncated, abbreviated entrepreneurial process of kind of fast and problem solving, and B, tending to recruit in our own mold rather than away from our own mold.
And are these the same mistakes that entrepreneurs make when hiring key executives who aren't the CEO? Yes,
but it's less pronounced. Now, I say that it's less pronounced. The most critical role that you'll recruit, like I live with that kind of, I don't know what I have this masochistic love of getting the most pressured job. So I recruit a lot of GMs for business owners who you're essentially asking the owner to pass over the business equivalent of their firstborn. Yeah. So when you're recruiting a GM for that, it's such a pivotal and critical role. When you're recruiting that level below, or if you're in a much larger organization where the mistakes of a few can be masked by the good of many, it's less punitive, but still punitive. And so, yes, the mistakes can still get made, absolutely. And by the way, if you're a CEO, your managers are making these mistakes when they're recruiting. Yeah. Right? So they're interviewing in cafes over a coffee. They're shooting the breeze with people rather than actually testing them.
Yeah.
They're doing reference checks when they've already made the decision that they want the person in their business, so they're not actually listening to what the referee is saying. They're only reference checking with the people who the candidate wanted to give you, rather than actually, as the Jeff and Brad Smart spoke about in their work of top grading and other books. They speak about a person who's a very, very good performer can give you every single person they've reported into. Yeah. People who are bad performers can only give you one or two. So these mistakes get made, and when I look at a lot of the mistakes of recruitment, like casual interviewing process, ignoring the fact that it's a two-way process, recruiting without really defining what you need and what you want, and the halo effect setting in, they're all born out of people just wanting a solution quickly and not being willing to put the hard yards in to get the decision right.
Yeah. It's coming at such an expensive cost, though. Not wanting to put the solution right, not wanting to get that right. So that's in the hiring bit. That's a few good notes there. But of course, that's only one component, because then if they select someone, what do you see when they join and through the onboarding and not about the onboarding, but from there, what are mistakes that entrepreneurs make after the person has signed the contract? After the CEO signed the contract, what are the mistakes that the entrepreneurs are making after that point?
Yeah, there's a couple of key ones that I think of clients that I've had to perform an executive search intervention with early in the piece, or we're still they've spent money with me, they've spent 6 months' salary, the person's not working out, they're scratching their head wondering why. I mean, listen, sometimes it's the candidate hasn't performed, or the candidate's gone into an environment that surprised them.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, it's less common that that's the case, and I know that sounds terrible because we're putting the onus back on the entrepreneur, but or the leader of the business. But in some ways, that's great because that empowers you, right? So it's empowering you to create the environment that has people succeed. I see many people. It's a very crass analogy, but why have a dog and bark yourself is something that I think is a great little line in business. But what I see is CEOs go into organizations and work for an owner who won't let go.
Yeah.
And then the CEO is confused, like, what am I here for? As you well know, in a business where the owner's been there 15, 20, 30, 40 years, people are very habitually going back to the owner to ask him or her questions. The standard line is, well, have you asked our new CEO? But often that doesn't happen. Often there's a need to be needed, and there's a real adjustment period for the owner that they don't always go through seamlessly, and they start answering questions, and that completely undermines the new CEO. So that's number one. And it probably is a very, very common one, where I'll get a lot of candidates call me and say, Brian, I'm just not being let do the job that I was brought in to do. The second one is changing the goalposts. So you bring a CEO in, you got a strategic plan to double the size of your business in 5 years' time. The CEO is completely on board. It's one of the reasons he joined or she joined, is because they actually loved the growth story that they were going into.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get cold feet and you go, actually, I don't want to grow anymore. I don't like what growth looks like. We want to stay as we are. Now, you're allowed to do that, but you got to understand as a consequence, you've recruited an offensive player, and now you're asking to play defensive play in the next 5 years. And, in most sports, that changes player, right?
It's not going to work. The person wants the growth story, and that's where they have, decided that's the next chapter of their life. What I'm really hearing there is owners who are not letting go, or perhaps don't have a clear communicated process to let go. And
correct.
It's just because you can't expect someone to join as a CEO on day one, and at 5 o'clock on day one, the keys are there, and no one really expects that. But but there are two people in this equation, and success is there. One of the things with someone who we know in common that was really good, I feel, was having a really clear line in the sand between this is my job and that's your job. How often do you think that people do that? As it might be my opinion that that's a tripwire, but it might not be true.
No. You're spot on. If I'd listed the third reason why these don't work out, it's that you've let go too quickly. And it's the least common one because owners and leaders don't. Because most owners and leaders know that to do that it's treacherous and it's overly trusting. But you're spot on in what you say is that, if I think of some clients that I think have done it really, really well, there's this beautiful ongoing evolutionary transition with constant communication, constant check-in, rhythmical check-in. So when I say rhythmical, it's once a month or once every 2 months. It's like, okay, what are you now doing next month and what am I doing? And that changes. And so you're not necessarily handing the keys to the city to your CEO on day one, but you are handing the pathway to the city, at which point they'll get the keys. And that pathway has checkpoints. And it's only when we're off the yellow brick road that we realize the bricks aren't yellow anymore. So we've got to have those checkpoints with the leaders that come into our business to go, this is what the next 6 weeks is going to look like. Yeah. That gives phenomenal clarity, because regardless of how confident you are, you do walk in with kid gloves on, even if you don't admit it, when you walk into someone else's business to run it. Like you'd want to be a really kind of apathetic individual to not be thinking like that. So being able to give them clarity and being able to have that constant reframing of their role and your role in a way that's not changing the goalposts, it's actually a way that's getting you closer to goal.
Yeah. Because the thing that's happening inside there is building trust. Because I trust what I've seen, but trust is earned, right? And the CEO needs to earn trust from the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur needs to earn trust from the CEO. Like, we got to build off of each other over time around, this is what I said I'm going to do, and this is what I actually did multiple times over.
Absolutely.
So
and Brad, just to talk that trust piece, people think trust is binary. Trust is not binary. So, if I say to you, will you come and mind my house for a weekend because I trust you? That's different to, can you be the executor of my will because I trust you?
Yeah.
Right? And that's different to, can you delve inside all my bank accounts and get full access because I trust you? Like, people think trust is either I'm trusted or I'm not trusted. That's BS. Like, trust is 50 levels of trust. And where it goes wrong is where someone tries to jump the trust levels. Like, why aren't you trusting me with the bank accounts? Well, because you're only here 5 weeks, and I gave you the keys to the office last week. So, there's but equally, the entrepreneur needs to trust, or the business chairman, whoever it is, needs to trust that the CEO's building trust as well. It's a two-way street. This is why, what you said earlier on, there's a real cost to getting it wrong. Yeah. There absolutely is, but people don't know they're doing it wrong. Everyone knows it's the research suggests it's a multiple north of 4 of the salary you're paying them is the cost of a mishire, but no one's doing it wrong on purpose. It's just, you're dealing with complex. The most complex thing in the world is personality, I think, right? Because there's
absolutely. And people have got different. To your earlier point, people have got different styles, and those different styles may play out in different ways. You've got to let the person be who they are and not get upset if they're doing something, but that comes back to the communication. So I want to just change gears a little bit here.
Please.
There's an idea that people from... I'm just going to stop there, because I want to just preface this by saying that I don't love single overarching statements about huge groups of people. For example, when the media or politicians will say, the Australian electorate decides this or they want that. Everybody's different. So that's the preface to this question.
Yeah.
Let's see what he's going to say now.
An idea. Or the Irish love a good party, something like that, right?
Some things are true. There's an idea that people from large organisations can struggle in small to medium-sized businesses. You come from a big multinational, you go on to somewhere that's got 50 employees. There's an idea around that, and it may be true, and it may be not true, and it may be true in some circumstances. You get my point. Have you seen this? And what should employers look out for, or what can they do?
Okay, so I'm going to feed your love and fear of stereotyping in what I'm about to say now. In executive search and in executive recruitment, you are guided by the stereotypes. You allow yourself to be surprised by the minority of people that might buck the trend of those stereotypes. But you are by and large guided by stereotypes, and you need to listen to them.
Yeah.
So I before I've met a person, I have decided what my already listening is of that person's personality. Because, listen, a bit of a party trick for me speaking at parties is to sit down and look at someone's group of friends and tell them their personalities based on the face that I see.
Yep.
And I'm right much more than I'm wrong, and it's only stuff I'd ever do when we're sitting down having a drink together rather than actually practice that in the profession. But we all have, and it's being really in tune with what you're hearing when you see someone's eyes, nose, particularly that part of the face. Now, so to go to your question, so I want to encourage people to listen to stereotypes because they're very, very helpful, and they're what has kept us alive for tens of thousands of years as human beings, is that ability to make judgments on stereotypes. When you're recruiting a CEO, if you are a small to medium-sized business and you're looking at someone who's only worked in large organizations, there are a number of things that I look at. One, did the person come from a small business around the dinner table?
Yeah.
So I want to understand if the person's parents worked in small business. And, what did your parents do? What was the conversation around the dinner table? So we're gonna continue with our stereotype danger here. If a person's worked for, a S&P conglomerate or a ASX 200 company, and their dad worked for an ASX 200 company, and their mum worked for an ASX 200 company, I'm starting to feel a little more nervous about their ability to assimilate.
Yeah.
If their early career, so 18 to 26, depending on when they actually left formal education, was all spent in big companies as well, that's another piece for me, because that's where our brain plasticity as adults is at its best. Mm-hmm. And it's where a lot of our kind of business behavior habits get formed, in my experience. So if someone's worked for a big company, but between the ages of 18 and 21 while they're in university, they worked for their neighbour's small business, then they left university and worked for a company that had 23 staff, spent 4 years there, I'm like, oh, the leopard doesn't forget its early spots. I'm okay with that. So this is what you want to look at. Don't just go to this person's just come from, Google, therefore they can't work in my business. I feel you need to understand the total journey.
Yeah, I ask it because I've been on the receiving end with executives who've, not necessarily CEOs, but executives who've joined leadership teams, and they've come from the Google or whoever it is, a large organisation, and we've got to make decisions quick, and we've got to back our decisions, and we don't have a sea of data or business analysts behind us to help out or to validate our decisions or to take the accountability away from us. And so these people I've seen them just not know what to do in that environment, and they're like, this is wrong, it doesn't make sense. So it really thank you, we've just validated the stereotypes, at least from our perspective. So
yeah, but by the way, I follow them as well. So someone needs to convince me that they are an exception to the rule. If they've spent the last 3 stints in large organizations and I'm recruiting for a business that's, let's say, 50 to 100 mil turnover, I'm like, you need to convince me that you can move to here, because exactly what you said. The speed of decisions, the lack of bureaucracy, the nimbleness and the pliability that a small business needs to operate within. But equally, it can be the opposite way around as well, right? If you're recruiting for a large organization, you've got someone small, they can be a little bit of a maverick in the eyes of the large organization. So I don't disagree, and I think it's a healthy stereotype to listen to and then try and find the exception to it.
Yeah. So there's 2 questions now. There's the question that I'm going to ask you, and then the question that I want to ask you. Somewhat connected. So the first question is the question I'm going to ask you. Should entrepreneurs use profiling tools like Myers-Briggs? The second question that I wanted to ask you is, what's the difference between Myers-Briggs and astrology?
And fortune telling. Maybe looking for a professional tarot card reader. Right, so I spoke earlier on about continuous assessment.
Yeah.
The biggest irk that I have with whether it's Myers-Briggs, whether it's Huns Wadsworth, whether it's DISC, or the plethora of others that exist,
Yep.
is when organizations make decisions solely based on the results of them.
Yep.
Right? That's when I have a problem with them. I feel like the tail's wagging the dog when that happens. We are in the human business, and so here's a few kind of semi sensational things to say as an executive search consultant. I rarely use cognitive testing on candidates. I have little interest in what someone's numerical reasoning is if I'm recruiting them into a role of leadership. Little interest.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I'd be curious, but I've little interest. And the same with verbal reasoning. And I just, these things have been promoted by the organizations that make money from them, rather than them being a phenomenal tool to recruit. Because this is the human game. Whether someone, like someone's ability to be resourceful, to find tools in the world to counteract their own weaknesses, to me is far better a skill than someone's ability to be able to compute complex mathematical equations because the numerical reasoning is so high, right?
Yeah.
So, and I kind of put personality profiling in a similar bucket, but not the same bucket.
Yeah.
Personality profiling should account for 5 to 10% of your decision making. If you gave me the choice and you said, Brian, we're allowed to do one more stage with these candidates, we are allowed to get them to complete a leadership submission where they outline their first 90 days in this job. They outline the biggest low in their career and what it taught them, and they outline the role models that they had in life and what they learned from them. Or we can put them through a Myers-Briggs. I would say save your money, do the former every single time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm they're probably have found their natural place in the process now. Organizations that I recruit for see them as a tool rather than seeing them as a northern light, and that's maybe the North Star. Maybe that's a great segue back into your astrology question.
Yeah, I asked that facetiously. Obviously, Myers-Briggs is the one that when you really dig into it and you see where did it actually come from, I think it was a couple of fellas in the 1930s who actually just made it up, completely made it up from scratch. And they're like, oh, this fits our model. Oh, that fits our model. Anyway, so I'm going to move on. What are the things that newly appointed CEOs are worried about when being hired by a founder?
Will he let go? Is he going to sell the business? Is he bringing me in to separate himself from the business to sell it? Will I disappoint? Because that's people's fear of failure anyway. Yeah, they're probably the three. And I said the first one really quickly because I've expanded on it a lot earlier on. It's like, will I go in here and really, is this a good idea that someone like Brad Giles told him to do, but he's not really ready to let go? It can be a fear of candidates a lot.
Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the sale before. I hadn't thought that. Yeah, that'd be quite a worry for them that I'm going to get put in there and I'm going to become an asset because now it's a business under management. That's awesome. Thank you. What about the flip? What about the other side of that? So what are founders worried about when hiring a CEO?
Will they get my business? Will they? A lot of founders, and you and I have had conversations about this over the years, to and fro at times. A lot of founders are so in depth in their business that they think that there's no one else that understands their sector like them.
Yeah.
And that can be a real, and I think often unnecessary and over emotionalized fear of founders when they're recruiting someone. We're not recruiting. This is going to use the analogy of a factory that makes widgets. We're not recruiting a person that needs to know how to make the widgets. We're recruiting a person that needs to know how to lead the company that has a factory that has people that make widgets.
Yep.
It is third or fourth hand, right? And leadership is so much. Leadership's very, very sector transferable, whereas production line staff, very, very hard to be sector transferable, right? So there's a worry that I often have to manage the client through, and also guide them and say, all the skills you've told me about, if I found you someone from this sector, would that work? And they go, oh yeah, probably would actually. And I go, well, and what about this sector? And really what I'm doing is stopping them look in a really myopic way and actually having the target audience that we can go to be much broader. Number two, will they honour the past? So I think owners can be very fearful that person's just going to come in and, new brush, new broom.
Yeah.
And I often talk to candidates about embracing the future but honouring the past. I think it's a really respectful way of running someone's business, is to, change your language from, well, that was the wrong way to do it, to, well, let's look at whether we could improve 1% in how we do that, right? So no owner wants to hear that their business sucked before you came in, even if you see it, right? So
yeah,
and that's a real fear, because I often see organizations clean the house before they bring the cleaner in, so to speak. They want to get their business right for the GM, and I go, no, that's what the GM's role is. Stop cleaning up, because you're hiding the dust under the couch, and they won't know there's dust there. Leave the dust out, let them see it, because they're part of the solution. And the other fear is the converse of what I spoke about the sale is owners have this massive fear, particularly in Australia, right? And I say particularly in Australia, we have a fairly unstable workforce. Like, people's version of stability here is to be in a position 4 years. People's version of stability in Europe is to be in a position 8 to 10 years. And in executive roles in the US, it's probably a bit in between. So particularly in the markets that I work with are predominantly Australia and New Zealand, people have this big fear that this guy's going to come in, or this girl's going to come in 2.5, 3 years with us and then go off and do their next thing, and I'm left picking up the pieces and going again. That's probably the other fear that they have. And so my word of warning there is, if you have a candidate who's had 5 jobs in 5 years, stop trying to convince yourself that you're going to be the perfect partner for them. They're probably going to have 6 jobs in 6 years, and you're going to be the 6th. You absolutely want to find people who have stability in their work and in their life. Everyone's allowed to have a short-term job in their career, because it happens to the best, but not loads. Yeah. It's unless there's massively extenuating circumstances at play.
Thank you. What makes for a bad salary package an entrepreneur might offer to a CEO? And part 2, do you recommend any comments around bonuses?
Wow, we could do a podcast on this on its own, Brad.
Yeah, I thought that too.
This is a can of financial worms. Okay, the first thing I'd say is build the package with the person. You don't have 5 CEOs if you're unless, again, you're a very, very, very large organization. You don't have 5 CEOs, so you don't really have parity. You don't go, well, we're paying our other CEOs this, so you got to match that. You're normally able to be a bit creative with the package. So use it as a two-way process and give them authorship. Now, that doesn't mean that they're allowed to go away and tell you that's exactly what they want and you got to honor it. Not at all. But build it with them, because you will start to get an insight to what they're motivated by. Yeah. Some people will be motivated by long-term bonuses. So this wraps into the second part. I absolutely support incentives. And by the way, I don't for 1 minute believe that a CEO or a GM should get 100% of their reward regardless of what results are. Absolutely not. Like, they need to share in the same lever points that you share in, right? So linking their incentives in some way to earnings are absolutely the way to go. But sitting down, understanding, like, you can go and say, well, listen, we're going to give you a company car. They might have a beautiful Lexus sitting in their garage. They don't need a company car, but they don't feel the space to say, I don't need a company car. Yeah. Sit down with them. You'll have in your mind what a total remuneration package looks like, but how that gets split up. They might ask for a 5th week off a year because, like me, they have parents. My parents just went back home to Ireland. When they come out, I love having a bit of extra time off with them and hanging out with them. That's more valuable to me than 15 grand, 20 grand. So, but if, so it's actually sitting down and working it out with them. And yeah, the other bit that I'd say about bonuses, albeit we're trying to be really brief with what could be a half an hour conversation on incentives, is don't allow bad profit to exist in your business because of the incentive of the CEO. And so, Fred Reichelt in The Ultimate Question and around Net Promoter Score speaks a lot about good profit versus bad profit. And, for those that haven't read it, basically, if you're making great money off a client but they hate you, that's really bad profit for your business. You don't want to incentivize one of your leaders to make profit where ultimately you could have lots of clients that are giving you a Net Promoter Score of 2 out of 10, but you're making money from them. So you need to have some qualitative measures to the incentive package as well as the quantitative measures of earnings.
Excellent, thank you. Changing gears a little bit, what do you think a better business looks like for you and most people you deal with? So the background here is I'm writing a book about building a better business. I find it a fascinating question. What do you think a better business looks like for you and most people you deal with in the context of the audience?
Okay, wow, this is a searching question without notice. I think we've spoken a hell of a lot today about communication. Yeah. Communication is not just talking. Some people think they've communicated when they've sent out a message. Communication is not a PA system. Communication is actually a journey. And the best businesses that I see are ones that authentically, the key people in the organization set the tone about what authentic, generous communication looks like. I read a great book years ago called How Champions Sell. It was by a guy called Michael Baber, I believe. And the first chapter, I think, or maybe the second chapter, because it's 15, 20 years since I read this, was about the power of listening and how... And the author had gone and looked at champions of selling across lots of different sectors. It was a little bit like what Jim Collins did in Good to Great, so it was kind of anecdotal evidence-based, not anecdotal, evidence-based literature. And he spoke about few people truly listen. Yeah. They hear, most people hear, few people truly listen. What I see in businesses is lots and lots of true listening and... in great businesses. So people feel heard. There's something incredibly powerful. I'd invite every audience member, the next person you speak to, shut your own mind off and truly listen to them and watch how that person starts to react to you, because it's so rare. And so when I see them in the best businesses, they're probably truly listening 20% of the time. It's a little bit like the human brain, right? We probably use it 8%, and those that are really clever might use it 9%. Brilliant businesses probably use it about 20 instead of my normal businesses 0 to 5. Yeah. And that's probably the key thing. The second thing is that the purpose of the business is higher than the purpose of any individual. And I know that's a really obvious thing to say, but often what I've seen in small to medium businesses are everyone's working for the whims of the owner and the wishes of the owner. That era is leaving us. I think our younger generations just aren't willing to sign up to that anymore. Yeah. And it is changing. But if you're a CEO of a business, or if you're the owner or you're a chairman of a business, really have a look at the purpose and the mission and the values of the business should absolutely transcend any individual. And I don't mean the ones that sit in your wall that people see. Yep. I actually mean the journey that everyone's on. Everyone needs to feel part of it. We're probably in a much more equal society than a hierarchical society now compared to 15, 20 years ago even, and I think businesses need to echo that change in societal trend.
Well, thank you. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
So listen, I've mentioned a few. In my business, I was really impacted by Fred Reichelt's work around Net Promoter Score, and I actually reached out to him and had a 1 hour video conference with him to chat to him about what I was doing, and I put a whole Net Promoter system in place, and we ran our business off it. We basically ran our business off it. We ran our business off super pleasing clients and super pleasing candidates, and every time the loop looked like it wasn't closed, we would close it and get better, and we just basically let our marketplace run our business for us to some degree, and we're really successful in that. So yeah, the Ultimate Question is a great book, and also James Kerr's Legacy about the All Blacks. The Power of Stories is fantastic, and just to learn. I'm a rugby fan anyway. I'm not an All Black rugby fan because they knocked my country out of the World Cup, but unfairly, I think. But you know, if you look at the most phenomenal sporting team in the world, and just the humility and the authenticity that they drove as part of their culture, I think a lot of organisations could learn from that.
Awesome, thank you. You may have you heard of the Net Promoter Score 3? The
Yes,
next version?
yeah.
That's out now, and it's really bringing it back to hard numbers, which I like because it's much harder to hack hard numbers. How can people learn more about you and your business?
We do a lot of our work now on word of mouth, which is fantastic, right? Which is brilliant because, you know, when you're doing something 20 years, whilst I enjoy pounding the pavements and wearing the rubberette in my shoes, it's not the first thing I think I want to do in the mornings. So a lot of our work is through word of mouth. So listen, I'm always absolutely open to have a conversation with a business leader. The reason I'm still doing this 25 years later is that I have a passion for people finding freedom in their life, whether I'm placing a candidate into the right job at the right time for them, or whether I'm releasing the shackles on a senior executive or a business owner that needs to recruit underneath them. That's what gets my head off the pillow in the morning. So I'm up always fine. I don't have a massively detailed website, although briscoesearch.com.au has links to most of what you might need to get in touch. But yeah, I'm in the human game. Just flick an email to careers at briscoesearch.com.au to send an email through to that. If you're in the situation where you want to delve a bit deeper on some part of your business, I'm always happy to have a chat.
Awesome, thank you. Finally, what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
my broken bone in my hand from playing tennis in a freak accident would be a good start, because I wouldn't say it's top of mind, but it's certainly going to clip my wings figuratively and genuinely, because I'm a pretty active person. Listen, I think the thing that I want to mention is that I'm doing this 24 years and I'm still learning. And I know, again, that sounds like a bit of a cliche. It's kept me stimulated and it's kept me surprised. I still get surprised. So it's important that people don't get too hard on themselves. If you have a mishire, just learn from it. Just look at what part of the process. I probably do 2 to 3 jobs a year I have to replace, because I give a 6 to 12 month guarantee on my work depending on the seniority of the person I'm placing. But every time I do, I look back and I go, what did we do? What could we have missed? What can we get better at? And it's a lifelong journey. It's the body of work that I've dedicated my adult life to, and I still get it wrong. And I think people can get despondent. People can go, I tried a GM, it didn't work, I just have to keep running the business myself. That's not the case. It's just I often say, I deal in the only product that can change its mind on the way home from buying it, right? So it's just the case, and I think that people can get despondent and disillusioned with it, and that there's no way of living on this earth without being in the people business unless you find an island to yourself, and even then you're going to need help the odd time. So I think you just suck it up. We're in the people game. We're all in the people game. I'm in it more than most, but if you're leading a team of people, you're in the people game, and you won't get it right all the time.
Brian Briscoe, thank you so very much for sharing your wisdom today. Just the years and years of experience, they shine through. And even for me, and certainly for our audience, there's been a ton of awesome tips. So thank you so much for sharing today. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, Keep thriving.